This is Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Mark. And this guest makes me feel like I'm in a Mark Twain novel. Welcome James Cook of Trashcan Joe. He's got a new project called Captain's Audio Project, and the two bands are like yin and yang. They both have that old-time jazz feel, but where Trashcan Joe is fun, upbeat, and occasionally raucous, Captain's Audio Project is a little more melancholy. James grew up in a very musical family, but he's the only one of his siblings to find his way into the music business. As I've mentioned, he plays old-time jazz, but he didn't start out that way. He got into Hendrix, Zeppelin, Sabbath, and the rock of the day when his neighbor gave him his entire record collection. And that's an interesting story. He tells me how he went from hard rock to the jazz that he plays now. He talks about busking through Europe with Jimbo Trout, building instruments from found objects, and how Trashcan Joe started. But check out Captain's Audio Project on Badman Records, pre-order it, and maybe James can come play a gig in your area. Follow him at Trashcan Joe's social pages for the time being. Follow us at Performance ANX on socials, and you can support the show through merch at performanceanx.threadless.com or by sending us money for coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. Now get your washtub bass out and jam along to James Cook of Captain's Audio Project on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
My name is James Cook, and I am releasing my new record under Captain's Audio Project, and it's called Waiting for the Moon. And I have just had a joyous experience talking to Mark from Performance Anxiety Podcast, and he's helped me getting this out here and sharing it with everybody. So thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Mark.
Nice to meet you. Well, thank you for joining me. This is really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you to doing an interview with me. I'm excited about my new record, and Howard's been helping me out a lot, and it's just great to actually do something with my art, that gets it out there a little bit.
Oh yeah, Howard's great. I love that guy so much.
Yeah, he's been awesome to work with.
I'm glad. I'm not surprised. I've heard that from everybody that he sent me. So he's a sweetheart. So I've never actually met him.
That makes two of us. I've only emailed back and forth. I haven't even talked to him on the phone, but you can tell a lot from someone's demeanor, just how they are so polite and nice and thorough, and you can just tell he's a great guy.
Oh yeah, I love how he starts every email with "Dear Mark."
Yes.
Even if it's a one-word answer, it's "Dear Mark."
Yes. Yep. That's that's a thing that's sort of lost. I don't think modern communications really include that kind of nicety anymore.
No. I know. I'll talk to my kids. I'll send them a text like, "Hey, I need your help," and instead of getting a "Dear Father," it's K.
Right. What do you want?
Yeah, exactly. Just one letter, K.
Right.
Oh. To get to the new album, I like to find out how you got started. And so I like to go back and figure out how music became so important to you. Was it something that was big in the family? Were your parents playing a lot of it? Were they musicians themselves?
Yes. Well, if you want me to start with that, yeah.
Please.
I grew up in a musical family. The living room, I grew up in a tiny little house, but the living room had a Hammond organ and a piano back to back in the center of the living room. That was like the main focus in the living room.
Wow.
And we had an old guitar and an old tenor guitar and a banjo ukulele, and probably a few other instruments lying around, that happened during that time. And so my parents would play, they both played, so they would get music out, and they would, my mom would play the piano and my dad would play the organ, or vice versa, and then they would, just get together and play music, and it was wonderful. My dad, when he was younger, he grew up in Los Angeles, he actually played live on the radio. He would back up singers as a musician playing live on the radio. And that was, a long, long time ago. That was probably in the I would say in the 1940s or something like that.
Oh,
but so he had music his whole life. In fact, I've got an old picture of him that was great because he looks just like me when I was young. And it's a picture of music school. It's called and the picture is literally like, I don't know, 3 feet wide by a foot tall, and it's the whole music school, the Clyde Jewett School of Music.
Oh, wow.
And they must have been sponsored by Dobro guitar, because almost everyone in that picture had a Dobro. And in the very center there was a Dobro amplifier. And that was pretty cool, I thought. So yeah, it was a big influence in my life growing up. And I have 2 sisters and a brother. And I'm really the only one that took to music out of the bunch of them. And I don't know what it was. I mean, I started playing saxophone in the 4th grade, and I played for 4th and 5th grade. And then my parents took me to the orthodontist. In one of life's great ironies, his name was Dr. Funk, and he was decidedly not funky. But he told my parents that the saxophone was contributing to my overbite, and that I should stop, and that I could, I needed braces, and I could play trumpet. And so I got braces, and my parents got me a trumpet. And I played trumpet for a year. If you can imagine playing trumpet with braces, it was not a pleasant experience.
Oh.
And so after that, I decided I wanted to play guitar, and that sort of changed everything for me, because I realized I could play and sing at the same time. And even though I wasn't a good singer back then, I really, started thinking about, hey, this allows me to actually make up songs. And
okay,
that's what I started doing. I started writing, instrumental stuff, and I was taking guitar lessons at the time, and that got me sort of thinking about, well, maybe I could write songs with lyrics, and eventually I took some vocal lessons and got better at singing, and over the years it was my thing. I started writing, and I just wanted to write, and I went also from playing guitar to in middle school I played electric bass in the middle school jazz band. That was a cool opportunity that I got. It was actually just thrown in my lap. I had taken a guitar class, and the teacher for the guitar class was also the instructor for the middle school jazz band. And he came up to me at the end of this was in I guess it was 7th grade. I took this guitar class, and he told me, hey, look, next year in 8th grade we have, or it was next year in 9th grade, he said, we need a secretary for the jazz band, someone to take care of all the music and the charts and keep them, organized and stuff like that. Do you want to have that? You could just come in and do that in the class. And I was like, sure, that sounds like not doing much,
Not fun, but not math.
Yeah, fun. And I get to hang out in the jazz band. And so I got there the next year in 9th grade. I showed up the first day, and he said, we need a bass player. It's you. Because I guess he knew that I could play guitar pretty good. He's like, hey, you can borrow my Fender precision bass until you can get one, and I have an amp here you can use, and you can be the bass player if you want. And I was like, great, and so my first bass gig was in the middle school jazz band. Never had played bass before, but I took to it really well. That was really my first exposure to ensemble playing, playing in a band. And it was great. I played with a lot of great musicians. The best that was in the school were in that band. And we had some really great musicians. Some of them went on to have great careers, and some of them gave it up, but that's just the way it is, So, yeah. And then after that, I moved on to playing. I really I begged and begged and begged my parents to get me an electric guitar. I had an acoustic guitar, but I was like, no, I really want to play an electric guitar, because I had this other amazing experience. It was kind of influential. My next door neighbor was maybe 5 years older than me. And when I was in middle school, he got heavily into drugs, to where he actually lost his mind. Oh. Like, he ended up having to be institutionalized. And when that happened, he came over and said, look, I have to go into the hospital, and they told me I have to give away all my stuff. And so I was wondering if you would take my record collection. And so he gave me his record collection, which was incredible. It was albums like, it was the original Rolling Stones Sticky Fingers with the zipper in the pants, which would probably be worth, $500 today.
Yeah.
But, it was like Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Elton John, Honky Chateau. I just remember listening to all these records and going, wow, this stuff is great.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I had a little AM radio that my parents gave me, and when I was supposed to be going to bed at night, I would hide it under my pillow, and when they closed my door, I would turn it on, and it was classic rock before it became classic.
It was just rock.
When it was just rock and roll, yeah. So.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Yeah, I had all these great influences. So I eventually started, I fell in love with mostly Jimi Hendrix. That was just the one, he was already long dead at that time, but he still played his music a lot. And I just loved his music and the style. And so I, begged and finally got an electric guitar. And my parents, I wanted to get an amp after that. They were like, no, we're not getting you an amp. And I'm like, but why? It's an electric guitar. I need an amp. And they said, well, we're worried that if you get an amp, you'll get into a band. And if you get into a band, you'll get into drugs.
Oh, you
and I was
neighbor.
like, I was like, understandable, but that's not going to stop me. And finally, I convinced them to get me an amp, and that was kind of funny too, because every time they left, I would just crank it up to 10 so I could get feedback like Hendrix would,
Yes.
And finally, one day, Mrs. Smith, who was the elderly lady that lived like 5 houses down, told my mom, she was like, Sue, every time you go to the store, I can't hear my television set. And so that was, that tells you a little bit about how I liked loud, distorted music at that time. And so I played lots of rock bands and whatnot, and kept writing my own music. And there was a brief time where I got into sort of the fusion jazz world. I had a friend who was really into jazz, and he took me to see Pat Metheny and Weather Report and some of these iconic jazz bands that were around at the time. And, I got into that, but I wasn't really, what I would consider a virtuoso of any sort. I was a decent musician, and I had a really good ear. I just basically learned to play by myself, by ear, just scratching up all my LP records. I would just, listen to them until I could figure out what they were doing. So that was a great way to do it. And then it wasn't really until I spent almost a decade in San Francisco, and I met these musicians that played, what I could describe as sort of jug band jazz. It was a guy played an old dobro, and then it was a washboard, and I played upright bass. And they played all this music from the old jazz era, Duke Ellington to Hoagie Carmichael and to old, jug band standards and folk songs. And that really opened up a world for me, I think, because, I was taking vocal lessons at the same time. And the songwriting that I was doing could sort of, at that time, be described as sensitive singer-songwriter, which was basically just kind of pukey shit that I wouldn't be, really, proud of today. But when I discovered that this older jazz from that period had like a humor in it that was really kind of biting, and because it was Depression era, and they needed that levity in the music to bring them up. And when I started writing with that sort of humorous edge, and I remember my vocal teacher saying, "That is your voice." Thank God you found that.
Wow. So, so you started off, because I'd read that you were into Hendrix and all, and so it was more of a gentle transition to the jug band sound. It wasn't like Hendrix and then you heard the jug band and then the light switch and like, oh, I want to do that. You went from like Hendrix to like James Taylor to the jug band.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, James Taylor was an influence, and some of the other, sort of folkies of that era, Jim Croce, and dozens and dozens of those people. Gordon Lightfoot I was a big fan of Gordon Lightfoot. A lot of the songwriting that I did was based off of playing acoustic guitar, but it didn't really have much of an edge. And I felt like some of it, now that I look back on it, was maybe just a little bit too syrupy and sappy, for my taste. Yeah. And it really was, I think maybe the real issue was that I don't know if I had lived enough life at that point. I really wasn't writing. The writing was a little bit more contrived and made up. As opposed to really writing from what was happening in my life, I had a pretty good life up to that point, and there wasn't really a lot of strife or struggles in it, and I think until I experienced some things that really were just intense, emotionally, that I was able to actually get out some more meaningful music that really, there's some points as a composer and a songwriter where you start writing a song and you just, to me, it's like, man, this is such a connection, it's such a heartfelt connection. I'll start crying while I'm writing it. I'll just be like, oh man, this is just, it doesn't have to be a sad song. It's just that it's like so intensely connected to something I'm feeling that it just, I'll just start bawling and I'll be like, oh, it's so good.
Was there a point when you knew this was what you wanted to do, or was it something that was innate in you and you just always knew?
Well, that's an interesting question because, I've always played music. It's always been part of my life, an important part of my life. But I also never, I have a lot of friends who are quote unquote professional musicians, and what that means is they teach lessons, they take every gig they can get, and not all of them are great and are fun, and and which is but that's part of being a professional musician if you want to make your living just from music. Mm-hmm. And I think what I decided kind of early on is that I didn't want to spoil music for myself. And I have, I've taught music. I've taught in a couple different music schools, and I've had a few private students. And as long as the students are really into it, that's great. But, sometimes like teaching at a music school, you'll get like a certain percentage of the students are there because their parents are making them go, and there's, not to say that there's not great students. And I had some great students who every week they would show up and they'd be hungry for more. And that's really gratifying. And that's just really the great part about teaching, because you feel like you're really reaching somebody and getting it out there. But, I just realized that, I think, I've always done other things to sort of support being able to do music when I wanted to. The one of the turning points, really, to kind of get back around to your question, was that when I was in San Francisco, I had always kind of considered myself amateur musician. I was just doing it for the love, and I wasn't really worried about, getting paid or whatever. Okay. But at a certain point in San Francisco, I was playing 4 nights a week and getting paid. And I just had this sort of epiphany, like, oh, I think this makes me a professional. And so that's what happened there.
Oh man. Yeah, I would say so. So it was, you just kind of stumbled into it.
Well, it was less of a stumble and more of just bulldozed into it. Yeah. I kept doing it, and by a certain point I was doing it so much that old adage, you are what you do, right?
Yeah.
And I have never been to a music school. So in many ways, I felt like, professional musicians, they have to go to a music school and they have to be highly educated. And I didn't really become more familiar with music theory and reading music until kind of that period when I started playing old-timey jazz. I was like, well, okay, there's all these chords, there's this is a B minor 7 flat 5. What does that mean? I have to figure that out.
What does that mean?
Well, that's, yeah. I mean, it means a lot, really. I mean, if you're going to be playing that, you need to know what a flat 5 is. It's of the chord, and you need to understand the chord scales and what chords work together. And that I was kind of afraid of that for the longest time because I thought, I don't need that to write my music. But I think it was maybe it was Leonardo da Vinci that said, art is part skill and part feeling and heart, and you have to have a little bit of both of them. And he also said, never limit your palette. And one of the things I discovered when I started playing these old-time jazz songs and I started studying music theory and learning more about my craft that I had kind of just didn't know about, it really upped my game in songwriting. It just opened up a whole new avenue and skill set for me to write songs. Yeah, it changed my songwriting a lot, for the better.
When you moved on into bands like Jimbo Trout and the Fish People and Lost Wax Process, were you writing for those bands, or was that one of those bands where you're playing along, and then is that when you just realized, hey, I'm playing 4 nights a week? And so?
Yeah, well, that wasn't, so those were two really instrumental bands in pushing me into a more professional level. Lost Wax Process, I was, just learning to play the upright bass, and it was actually, I was taking lessons from Adam Levy at the Blue Bear School of Music in San Francisco, and he asked me to play in his band because, he wanted someone, he realized I had a good ear, and he saw potential, and when I got into that band, boy, I was over my head, because, I mean, he's a great musician. The drummer was the timpani player for the San Jose Symphony. The sax player had been the sax player. Rob Sudduth had played with Huey Lewis and the News. And so these guys were all really top-notch players, and I felt like, oh boy, I'm just like really. I'm barely keeping up here, but I went for it because I felt like this was a learning experience, and I could do that. Now, that didn't really, that band, I don't know if that influenced my writing very much. I was just, basically spending most of my time trying to keep up with everybody in that band. But Jimbo Trout, however, that was the jug band, with the guitar and washboard that played all those old-timey jazz songs that heavily influenced my writing from that point. That's when I discovered all those old jazz songs. And the interesting thing about those old jazz songs is they are basically music theory 101. They are the way they're written, the chord changes and all these things are the basis of teaching music theory. So just by virtue of learning how to play those songs, it really kind of hammered home the basis of music theory that I didn't really have. I was not like a part of my skill set before that. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, it really opened up a whole new door for me writing wise, because I was like, wow, I've got all these different great chords and voicings, and I have a good ear for melody, and so it really just made it made all this new stuff available to me that I didn't realize I would have had. Wow. So that was great.
I never would have thought of that. So all right, so I do have a question about Jimbo Trout, because I was trying to find videos and the music, and I saw something that was really interesting, and I didn't know if you were a part of it or not because it doesn't give me a whole lot of information. But I saw that they played a show at Alcatraz. Were you part of the show at Alcatraz?
That's quite. I was not, but I believe Jimbo is still living in San
Alcatraz?
Francisco, and no, he's not in Alcatraz. I hope not, but that band still exists. As far as I know, as long as Jimbo's around, he still uses that. That's his band, and so yeah, and he's a great guy. He's I learned, one of the great things I learned from Jimbo is that he's fearless. Back when I was playing with him, I had never really toured or, played shows out of my own little local area. And one day he came up to me and said, "Hey, we should go to Europe."
No.
And I was like, "And what?" And he's like, "Just play. We'll play on the street," because he was a street musician at heart. He played on the street a lot. He was a busker. And so we did it. We just, I had a job at the time, and I told my job, I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to go to Europe for 3 weeks. And, if I have a job when I get back, great. If not, well, that's the way things work." And I had never been that brave, before to just say, "Hey, I don't care if I have this job." I was always kind of struggling and thinking, well, I'm lucky to have a job, got to do this, and you can't do anything to piss your boss off. And
know that.
And at that, but Jimbo's attitude towards it was just like, screw it, let's just go, just go and see what happens, and so we did. We went to Europe. We played on the street all over. We played in Amsterdam and in Germany and Poland and the Czech Republic, and it was a great experience. And one of the things, and we were able to make enough money to pay for our hostel and our food, and not much else, but we actually were able to survive by doing that. And eventually, we played in this town of Hamburg up in northern Germany. We got a gig at a club. It was called Knust. It was like Knust, I think is how it was spelled. But it just so happened that a friend of ours from the Bay Area, this guy Pat Thomas, who had a record label back then called Heyday Records. They were actually quite popular. They had a lot of artists that were touring Europe at the time as well.
Okay.
And Pat was over there. Pat was also a musician, and he was over there performing. And so he said, "Hey, I'm going to be playing at this club. Do you guys want to open up for me?" And we thought, okay, cool. That would be great. So we got this club gig, and we show up and we play this club gig, and there was a German record label called Tunes with a Heart. And they were there to see Pat, and they saw us, and they said, "Wow, I really like your music. We want to put one of your songs on a compilation CD that we're putting out."
Oh, wow.
And that I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And so we did that, and it did really well. And then he came back to us. And he said, "Well, I'd like to put a whole record out with you guys. I'll you guys record it, and I'll pay for the production, and we'll have it over here in." We'll release it over here in Germany, and you can come over here and tour.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
And so after that, we did, a couple of subsequent tours all over, mostly Germany, really. And we actually had a booking agent and a publicist and a promoter and did a couple tours over there, and that was a great experience. Except for the part is that I had to haul around an upright bass everywhere. But
that would get tiresome, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was challenging. We actually had a flight case, and we rented a station wagon, and we strapped it to the roof of the station wagon. And let me tell you, driving down the Autobahn at 100 miles an hour with your life, when your moneymaker strapped to the roof, you were like, well, I hope that stays on there.
Oh my God. I'm very curious to find out when you started playing resonator guitars, and also when you decided to move to Portland and why?
Well, those are both good questions. The resonator thing was really an interesting, it was just kind of serendipitous, I guess. At the time, I had started playing tenor guitar, which is a 4-string guitar. And I mean, they were sort of, tenor guitars came about in the 1930s. Everybody in that time played tenor banjo. It was the rhythm instrument of most bands, because it was the only thing loud enough to compete with horn sections, and they didn't have amplification, And so later on, a lot of companies started putting tenor guitars together so that tenor banjo players could have a different instrument to play and could also play guitar. So it was, be strung the same way. So I ended up, inheriting, my dad gave me his old tenor guitar, this 1930s tenor guitar. There wasn't a very good one, really, but I had it fixed up and I started playing it, and I liked it so much that I started writing music on it. And then I had this friend in the Bay Area. His name was Rick Hendrix, and he passed away quite a few years ago. But he called me up one day because he knew that I played tenor guitar, and he said, "Hey man, I've got this old National tenor guitar, and I've got to pay my taxes, and I was wondering if you wanted to buy it from me." and I was like, well, yeah, but I only have like $300. And he's like, "Oh, that's not enough, man. It's worth, a lot more than that." And I'm like, well, sorry, I mean, I would love to buy it, but, like I said, I've only got $300, and he was like, "Yeah, that's not going to do it." And, he hung up. And then like 2 days later, he called me up and he's like, "Look, I really need the money. So I'll sell it to you for $300 on one condition, that if you ever sell it, you sell it back to me." And I was like, okay, so he sold me this, I don't know, it's probably, I think it was probably made in 1928. And it was a National tenor guitar. And that's kind of what started me playing resonator guitars. I just fell in love with that sound because it's, it sounds like the acoustic version of an electric guitar. It's got this like kind of grit to it that sounds like a Fender Stratocaster to me. And I was always a Stratocaster guy when I was playing electric guitar. And so I'm like, man, that has just got this really powerful, it's loud, it's great for playing, at the time I wanted to, I was busking, my songs I would play in the subway and on the street, and with a little wooden acoustic guitar, you're just not loud enough. But with this resonator guitar, you could really project, and I have a loud projecting voice, and so it was a perfect combination. So I just fell in love with it at that time. And I played that for years and years and years, and then eventually got another one. And then since then, I've I have 4 of them now.
Nice.
The latest one is this one right here.
Ooh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
oh wow.
all original National polychrome Triolean. And here's another one here. This is a silver bodied one.
Oh, that is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Oh.
These are just amazing instruments, and one of the cool things about tenor guitar is that they made 6-string versions of all those things, and those are highly sought after. But not that many people play tenor guitar. You got like Nico Case, what's his name, Ellis, the guy in I'm trying to think of it, the Australian band, Nick Cave's band, plays a tenor guitar. But not that many, Warren Ellis.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but there's really not that many prominent people. There was an old folk guy. I forget the name of the band. But really, not that many really famous people played tenor guitars, and so it's not as popular of an instrument. I guess my point is that you can get them a little bit cheaper than you can if it was a 6-string guitar.
That makes sense.
And there's not as many of them around. I mean, it's that's why, like, if I see a really good one, I'm like, do I pay the mortgage this month or do I buy this guitar?
Are there any companies making newer tenor resonators?
There is. Well, National. So there's a great book if you ever want to read about it. It's called The History and Artistry of National Guitar. It was written by Bob Brosman. But National Guitar lasted for a certain period of time. It was actually started by this guy John DePera, and he teamed up with this vaudeville guitar player who wanted a louder guitar. So John DePera was the inventor, and the vaudeville guitar player was sort of the marketing guy, but he was also a very savvy businessman, and he stole all the patents from John DePera. And when they had an argument eventually, John DePera lost out, and this other guy had all the patents. But John DePera had all the knowledge to build the stuff, but he wasn't able to build anymore. So he made National for several years. And then come into the 1940s, he had to stop. So what he did is he went with his brother to Chicago, and he started DePera Brothers, or Dobro, which is how we got the name Dobro.
Oh, wow.
And they did it, for many, many years, but then, they got old and retired and eventually passed away, and that stuff kind of fell by the wayside. And then fast forward to the I guess it was around late 80s, 1990s. This guy was really passionate about National guitars and actually found all the old dies and things that were used to make the guitars. Whoa. They were just sitting like in a family farm or something like that, rusting away.
Oh my!
And he bought them, and he started up National Guitar again. And so National Guitar exists now, and they make tenor guitars still. So you can buy a brand new National tenor guitar from National. They're down in San Luis Obispo, California, and they make guitars just as good as they always were. They're really great instruments, really high quality. They really, it's a small little company, and they're great people, and they're super dedicated to continuing the making of great metal body resonator instruments. They still do it.
That is incredible. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
All right, so what brought you to Portland?
Well, at the time, I was living in the Bay Area, and I ended up getting married and having a kid, and my wife and I, and then she got pregnant again. And we were like, we were, living in an apartment in the Mission District of San Francisco. And it was a great place to live when you're single. There's like 5 taquerias on the block that I lived on, but there was also gangs, hanging out everywhere. And we were just like, we would like to, she was, pretty, a lot more gainfully employed than I was. And we thought, well, maybe, actually what ended up happening is the company she worked for was moving, and they said, we want you to move to Virginia with us. And she was like, I don't want to do that. And then they were like, well, we'll give you this big severance package, and you can just go do whatever you want. And so they gave her a big chunk of money that we figured we could use on a down payment for a house. But even at that time, and this was, in, I guess, 1999, we looked around, and at that time, it was like the only thing we could maybe even come close to affording, and it wasn't really affordable, was paying $500,000 for a really rundown house in a really bad neighborhood in San Francisco, because it was the beginning sort of the .com revolution. And so I had at the time they were doing it's something different now, but at the time they were doing North by Northwest, which is the sister of South by Southwest in Austin. And they had that up in here in Portland. And my band at the time, the Wags, got a gig doing North by Northwest. So we came up here, and we had some friends up here. My wife's college roommate lived up here. And so we stayed at their house, and I did the gig. And it happened to be, a really nice summer's weekend that we were up here. None of the rain that Portland's so famous for, and we walked around and just felt like, man, this place is so much more livable than San Francisco is an intense place. It's sort of like I used to like to call it the California's version of New York, because it's just like wall to wall houses, and not and intensity, and it's just a lot of people in a very small place. It's not nearly, it pales in comparison to New York. I've been to New York, and not that, any New Yorker will say, San Francisco is nothing close, and they're right. But as far as what California has, or the West Coast, it's sort of that, it's that kind of intensity. Yeah. And so, we just decided, hey, let's try Portland. And, when I got up here, I was like, wow, I can actually park in front of my own house, because I would get done with a gig in San Francisco, and I'd come home at 2 a.m. and I'd drive around for 45 minutes looking for a parking spot, and sometimes I would have to park on the street or on the sidewalk, and just take the ticket. It's like, well, I'll just take the ticket. That's my parking fee, because I can't find a parking spot.
Wow.
Really the last thing you want to do is drive around in circles for, waiting to get pulled over at 2 a.m.
For sure. Yeah, I can understand that. When you moved to Portland, that's when you started Trashcan Joe, right?
Yep, that is. I started, it really started out when I got here. Being a bass player is sort of a great advantage in any situation, new situation. And so moving to a new town, everybody needs a bass player. So I thought, I kind of got, the first thing that happened is I got sort of in with the bluegrass and old time music community, which was it still is really vibrant here in Portland, but it was a really big deal at the time. There was lots of music happening in the bluegrass and old time fiddle music world. And so I got lots of gigs playing bass, and I met lots of people, and I started playing bass in a bunch of bands. And at that time, my upright bass, which is like 100-year-old German upright bass, was starting to fall apart from, years of touring and abuse. And
100 miles an hour on the Autobahn.
Yeah, exactly. And so I took it in. I met a really great luthier, and I took it into her, and I said, look, I'm going to give you my bass. I want you to fix it up, and I don't want to get it back until I don't need to take it to you for another 20 years or so. I want you to do everything to it. Yeah. And so she had it for like a year.
Wow.
And during that time, it got me thinking, well, can I come up with something that, what could I come up with that's a bass that I could build, that I can repair, that I can, that sounds pretty good. And I started researching the old washtub style of basses. Right. And, the original kinds of washtub basses were basically a washtub turned upside down with a string and a stick on the edge, and you would pull on the stick and it would change the tension on the string, and that's how you would change the note.
Oh, wow.
And they're not, some people are really good at them, like Fritz Coleman was known for that. But for me, mostly it's really hard to make accurate notes. It was really like whoop, whoop, whoop. It was more of like a thumping sound, which was okay. That was, it worked for some situations. But I wanted to be able to play accurate notes, and I started researching what some other people were doing. And what other people were doing is they were making a little stand and a stationary neck that would be just solid, and then one string that would come down that neck that you could play up and down like an upright bass. Okay. So you could get about 2 octaves, if you tuned it to a low E, you could play up and get about 2 octaves of notes on it. And so I eventually started doing that, and it sounded great. I ended up getting, just as many gigs. Nobody cared. Like, they would be like, this thing sounds just like an upright bass. You go ahead, play it, do whatever you want, That's awesome. And so in the process, I was thinking, wow, that came out really good. I just thought it would be a joke. I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if I could make a banjo out of a trash can, and so I tried it, and lo and behold, it actually sounded good. I ended up using a resonator cone, just like in a National, as the sound producer. And I used the bottom 4 inches of a trash can as the face. And I put the lid on the back as sort of like the resonator plate. And I got a friend of mine gave me an old banjo neck that I put on there and put it together. And it sounded great, and I was like, wow, I want to start a band.
That's amazing.
And, I ended up throwing a birthday party for myself at my house and bringing a bunch of old-timey musicians. And this one guy showed up, who is now my really close dear friend, Jason Wells, and he was learning at that time to play trumpet and flugelhorn. And there's no, his girlfriend was in the old time music community. There's no horn players in old time music. In fact, they probably would just go get out of here with a horn. And he used to joke that he would bring his flugelhorn to bluegrass jams and he would call it fluegrass. We did it. But he had this great love for this old-time jazz music and old-time jug band music that I loved. And so we became instant friends. And I thought, well, look, I want to start a new band. You want to start a new band? And that was it. That was the birth of Trashcan Joe. And I had another friend who was a very talented slide guitar player. And so he ended up making a slide guitar out of a small feed trough. His name is Ben Bonham. And then so we had, and I got someone else to play the trash can bass. Eventually I went to using trash cans instead of wash tubs because they sounded better. But I built a wash tub bass and got a bass player to play it. And then so we had like a trash can, wash tub sort of steel guitar, or trash can banjo, wash tub bass, and then Jason on cornet. And that was the birth of that band. Yeah, it was super fun, and we're still together today, 22 years later.
And you've added an accordion and a washboard.
Yep. Over the years, we've had a few different members. Jason and I are still the two original founders of the band. But Ben eventually moved out to Hood River, Oregon, so he was really too far away to be a regular part of the band. I still, close friends with him, and we still play music once in a while. Okay. But we ended up pulling in Mike Danner on accordion, and we've had a couple different washboard players. And currently, we're Jen Forty, our washboard player, have all been in the band. She's been in the band, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. She's one of the newer members. So yeah, we did change. Yeah, we did change a few. We've had a few different musicians come in. I think the bass players have been the most changed up over the years. We've had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 maybe different bass players over the years that have played with us. But
your version of the Spinal Tap drummer.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'll tell you what would impress me is if you guys can make a homemade accordion, then I would be blown away.
Well, it would impress me too, although I did. So I don't know if you know what a pump organ is.
Yes.
It's an old-fashioned church organ, but it uses a bellows like an accordion, and you have foot pedals that you pump to make the sound. Well, what I did is I took the guts out of an old pump organ, and I put it inside of a feed trough, and then I put a Ford truck grill on the front of it, and I used a geriatric walker as the base for it, and these little old pedals from the pedals were actually the foot things from a wheelchair, and I called it the Ford Toboggan. It was a tub organ, but I still have that, so it's basically it's an organ. It is actually an organ, but it's foot powered, and it's built into a feed trough. We don't use it very much because it's a bear to carry around, and the accordion player, of course, will play it, but it's also a lot of work physically to keep pumping those pedals all the time while you're playing. Unless you ride a bicycle a lot.
So you've got a new project out, and I'm curious, what made you decide to do a solo project outside of Trashcan Joe?
Well, that's a good question. Prior to Trashcan Joe, I had my band, The Wags, which was basically me singing, playing tenor guitar, and playing my songs. It was all my music. And one of the ideas behind Trashcan Joe was that I didn't want to be the only front man. I'm okay with being the front man, but I just got tired of being the only one. And so I in Trashcan Joe, everybody sings. And so we actually take turns and we go around, and so if we play a set of music, we'll just be like, I'll sing a song, and then Jason will sing a song, and then Mike will sing a song, and then Matt will sing a song, and then Jen will sing a song, and it'll come back to me. Yeah. And so during a regular 45-minute-hour set of music, I might sing 2 or 3 songs of my songs. Okay. And I write a lot of music, and not every bit of that music is 100% appropriate for that band. And I just write so much that I wasn't able to actually play a lot of that music. It just kind of was sitting there. So the accordion player, Mike Danner in Trashcan Joe, came up to me, approached me one time. He said, "Look, you should come into my studio sometime and just sit down with a couple microphones in your guitar and play your tunes and put that out." And I thought, well, okay, I wasn't really convinced it was something that I wanted to do, but I thought, well, I'll try it, so I sat down and I recorded. We came up with 11 songs that I felt fairly good about, and then when I got done with that, tenor guitar is a pretty high voiced instrument. It's fairly tinny, and it's at the top end of the musical spectrum. And so I always like to have bass on the bottom end to add to that, to sort of balance it out. So I thought, well, okay, I've got this recording. I'll just, since I'm an upright bass player, I'll put upright bass on all the tracks so that I can have upright bass on there. Mm-hmm. And that sounded really good, and it just kind of leveled it up a little bit. And then Mike, being a keyboard player, was like, well, let me put some keyboards on some of this stuff, and see how that sounds. And he ended up putting keyboards on every song, and it just sounded so good. At that point, we were like, okay, well, maybe we need to put a little icing on the cake, and add something, and so that's when we had our friend Paul Brainerd, who's an amazing pedal steel guitar player, come in. And so he put pedal steel on a couple of tracks, and that sounded amazing. And he also happens to be a trumpet player. And he was like, yeah, why don't I put some horns on something? I've got a horn section that I work with. I'll bring those guys in. Wow. And so we ended up putting a whole horn section on 2 of the songs, the opening track and one other song. And that was like the best decision we could have made, I think, because, I'm very confident with my songs, and I feel good about them. And, I feel pretty good about my singing and my guitar playing. But just to have it just me, song after song after song, it wasn't enough of a, it just didn't make it as listenable. And I think, bringing in all these other great musicians to add what they're great at, to, just add a little bit flavor on that. It would be like, I liken it to like making a soup, and your soup is just a potato. Well, you could have just a potato, but you could add carrots and peppers and garlic and onion, and it's a better soup then.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's how that happened.
Okay. Well, I've been enjoying it for the past several days. It's such a gentle album. I kind of picture it as like the album that you would listen to if you were Huck Finn floating down the Mississippi. It's just
That's great.
It makes me feel like I'm in that time period, and it's very unusual in that regard because everything is so noisy and so much. There's added so much in post or a lot of artificial stuff coming in. This is organic sounding, and it just sounds like something from that era. So,
well, that was the idea, to make it something real and pure. And I've always been, a real fan of just like, straight, most of the recordings I've done in the last, decade, 2 decades of my life have been live recordings where I would just show up with a band and play live, and because I wanted that live energy. Yeah. I've done recordings where you go in and overdub a lot of stuff, but and I just wanted it to be really like raw and vulnerable and pure. And I think that, it sounds like, from your response to it is that's what I achieved. It was
absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing because that's one of the things that I wrote is that your lyrics particularly sound very personal. They okay, my favorite song on the album is The River. And
oh, thank you. That's mine too.
Oh, the lyrics are so descriptive and wonderful. They're very wistful. It's a beautifully written song. The lyrics are incredible.
Whatever path you choose, no matter what you do, the sea will greet you one day, and the river flowing through my heart is you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm also a big fan of the first single and the opening track, which you mentioned, Really Hard to Find. That really sets a great tone for the album.
I'm waiting for the right moment to come when I meet my lover. Maybe it's an easy road for some. Like no other, I know you'll take me to the end of time. You're really hard to find.
The one that makes me laugh the most is probably Satan wrote this song. Sounds a bit naughty.
My first conversation with the devil, he said I was living too right. Drink some of this, smoke some of that. Check out my red, baby, it's so tight. You string me along. Just remember it ain't me, baby. Satan wrote this song. Second conversation with the
I like that one a lot. And then the one that is interesting to me, just because my understanding of it is that a hobby of yours really shaped the song, is Waiting for the Moon, the title track.
Oh, yeah. And I do love astronomy, and I'm sort of an obsessive hobbyist, and so astronomy is one of my hobbies. And in fact, I wish I actually have a telescope, and I didn't manage to get it out when we had clear skies for a couple of weeks. But there's sort of a planetary train going on right now where you can see Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars, Neptune, and Uranus all at the same time.
Oh, wow!
They're not right next to each other, but you can look up at the sky and move your telescope around and see all of them right now.
Oh, wow.
And for the past week and a half or 2 weeks here in Portland, it's been really nice, clear skies. And every night I've been looking up going, man, I should really get my telescope out. But it's also 30 degrees out, and I don't want to sit outside.
I understand that. I do a lot of photography myself. I used to be a professional photographer, so I understand going outside and photographing in the cold. Because I went up to school in Rochester, New York, and
oh, yeah. Upstate New York. Very cold.
Terrible. Anyway, so I mentioned that my favorite song is The River, but the one that comes second in line is the very last song, which I love. I love Sometimes. It is
that's awesome.
And whatever fate there lies beyond, sometimes late in the night I burn for you, I yearn for you, I learn. Sometimes late in the night I dream of you, I don't mean to when I feel.
I know the whole album. It's weird. It's got. I don't want to say melancholy. It's got this quietness to it, and a little maybe wistfulness to it. I don't. But it sounds like almost the other side of the coin of Trashcan Joe.
You would be right about that. It is definitely a little bit more, I guess, sad and melancholy, and it is sort of written about being alone and maybe dreaming about someone, or having there's been a couple of times in my life where I met some people that could have been, I felt like could have been potential relationships, but they were like in different countries or different parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And so they were just, there was no chance that would happen. And so, this song is sort of inspired by that, like, unrequited love, not able to actually have that, but dreaming about it and feeling, and sort of being obsessed about it maybe a little bit,
I can understand that.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you bringing that song up, because that was one song, that I didn't know if it fit in with the other ones. It's a little bit, it's definitely different.
Yeah.
I suppose through the filter of just me singing it and playing it, it has a connection to everything else. But songwriting wise, I felt like, it definitely was a little bit of a step in a different direction than a lot of the other stuff. And
I can understand that, but as much as I think Really Hard to Find is a great way to open it, I think Sometimes is a wonderful, beautiful way to end the album.
Well, thank you. I kind of felt that way too when I started sequencing the record. Even just the way the song ends, it really sort of makes you think, and it brings you into this sort of, it sort of sucks you into this dreamy, ethereal space, so that when it just ends quietly, it makes you want to listen to the album again.
Yes.
And that's sort of what I was going for. I didn't, sometimes it's nice to end with something raucous, but I felt like in this case, the album in of itself, it has a lot of different moods, and ending that way was just a sweet way to, just to end it, And so thank you so much for bringing that song up. I love that song.
Absolutely. It's, like I said, it's my second favorite, right behind The River. And the two of them together specifically makes me anxious for spring and summer. I want to build a raft and float down the Potomac listening to that thing. So,
yeah.
Because I live in Virginia, so as much as you didn't go there, that's where I'm from. So.
Yeah, I've been there. It's been a long time, but
I love it out here. So I moved up from Alabama 18 years ago. God, it's been 18 years. Holy crap. Yeah, like 17, 18 years ago. It's much as Portland fits you. I live in Winchester, and it just fits me. So I'm very happy.
That's great. Well, there's a lot of open space and beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the country.
It is. Well, now Northern Virginia is starting to creep its way in, and I'm not very happy about that. Anyway.
Well, and I guess you can't stop progress. Portland. A lot of people here in Portland complain that it's not like it used to be. It's changing, and of course, well, the population is getting bigger.
Yeah.
There's just more and more people. That's the reality of life.
And we get so many people from moving into DC with every administration, and then a certain percentage stays, and then that starts driving price up, and people start pushing out towards my way, and then Because I'm about 75 miles due west of DC, so it's we're starting to feel it every year. Just a little more, a few more people coming in from DC, a few more. But anyway, so are you planning on supporting this with live shows? Are you staying in the Portland area to play, or are you going to venture out?
For right now, I think starting out, I just booked a CD release party on March 9th. The full album releases on the 29th or 28th, I think. The full album releases on the 28th of February. And so March 9th, I'm just actually starting to put that together. And then, I'm just going to see how it goes. I'll book probably local shows. And I think what I would rather do, as opposed to just like hit the road really hard and tour, is try to book some festivals, and do some more like destination gigs. If I book a festival, what I would probably do is, maybe book some supporting gigs somewhere around in that same area. Depending on, the contract of the festival. Some festivals don't want you to have any gigs within 500 miles and 2 weeks of the festival, because they want people to come to the festival. But, we'll see how that goes. I've done enough touring and sleeping on floors and driving from town to town that and I kind of told myself actually, after doing it in the, with Jimbo Trout, that I thought, if I'm going to ever tour again, really seriously tour, it's going to have to be at the next level where I've got some support. I've got maybe a better vehicle to do it in. I don't necessarily need a tour bus, but I figured, if I can get enough backing and if I can get enough exposure on the radio to where I can book some gigs and maybe, just make it a viable thing, not a money losing thing, really. We'll see how that goes. For now, probably going to book a bunch of local shows and then, just see if I can get some festivals over the summer if it's not too late to start booking those. So,
where can people find the album and pre-order it? And is there a social media presence where they can follow you to find what you're doing?
So I have a Facebook page. I just attached a new Captain's Audio project to my regular James Cook Facebook page. The album is going to be released on Bandcamp, which would be a place where people could go and actually buy it if they wanted to support me that way. And then I will probably start using, even though I've never really used Instagram much, I'll probably start posting some stuff on Instagram. And then I actually submitted the album through DistroKid, which puts it on all the streaming services. So it came out really hard to find. I just released that single today, and that is out on Spotify and all the other streaming services. Some I don't even know what they are. You just kind of give it to DistroKid, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll put it out there for you." So I'm kind of relying on their expertise to get that stuff out there.
DistroKid's really good, though. DistroKid's really good.
That's what I hear. Yeah,
a few people over there. They're really good. Is there a current Instagram presence, or is that something you got to be setting up?
Well, I have one that's listed under Trashcan Joe, which I might start with. And then I haven't set up one for a Captain's Audio project yet. And I just literally set up one on my Facebook page. And of course, Facebook is a challenge to use, for some stuff like that, because nowadays they want to charge you for any kind of promotion that you do. And it's a matter of, you kind of have to weigh that against, well, what good is, how much good is this doing? But, I have, just my own personal page. I've got over 1,000 friends on that page that I can start with. And then, I'm just going to start doing it kind of on a low-end roots basis and see what happens. And, I've been working with Howard, as we said, and I'm also working with another guy who's a college radio promoter who's going to put it out and get it out to a bunch of college radio stations. So ideally, I would be able to do a lot of, at least a West Coast shows, and go to a few college towns where, there's a presence there that, a lot of college towns have a pretty good music scene associated with them. So,
Yeah.
The idea would be to, do that. I'll start maybe West Coast, and deal with Portland and Eugene and Bellingham and Seattle, and maybe get down as far as the Bay Area or Northern California, somewhere there, and then as far east as Boise, Idaho, and maybe even Montana. We'll see how that goes.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, just kind of taking it one step at a time. I think right off the bat, I'm gonna see what kind of exposure I get through getting it on the radio and getting it out there. Just trying to throw it out there. I've been on a few indie labels before with my different projects, and it was really a mystery what indie labels did.
Yeah. I think it's a mystery what major labels do too.
Yeah, exactly. And now that I have a good friend, my friend Dylan, who runs Badman Recording. It's his little label here in Portland. Oh, yeah. And he's been really helpful, just sort of giving me insights on what to do. He was the one who hooked me up with Howard, and also Graham, the guy who's going to do my radio promotion. And just, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's not cheap either. I saved up some money to do this, and it's really, as far as my own music, in the past, I would just record it and then put it on Bandcamp and then, tell my Facebook friends, and then I would get like maybe one like.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
But, I decided at this point, it's like, well, okay, it is a business. And if you treat it like a business, you will get business-like results, and it's really hard as an artist to treat, to be that way. I've always just wanted to do the art, and I'm not a good business person, really. I'm not, and you have to be really motivated to do all that stuff. So this, at this point, I thought, well, okay, I really like the record. I really am proud of it. I'm proud of my songs, and I figure I owe it to just put it out there and get as much exposure with it as I can. Well, it does, as Chris Rock once said, "Crack don't smoke itself."
I think that is the perfect way to end this. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, Thank you.
I enjoyed this chat so much. Thank you for everything, for sharing the music. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And if you ever come to the DC area, let me know, because I would love to see the show.
I would love to do that, Mark. It would be a great pleasure and just to meet you in person. It's really been a joy talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Waiting for the moon, waiting for the moon, waiting for the moon to go down behind the mountain where my